extremely uncomfortable is not good, but I won't always change my policy because of it. And it's also, it builds character, right? And I think I'm just like
No,
saying, and
you
I'm
are right,
trying to
Masua.
be, like,
You're right.
very, very
No.
gentle, because I don't want to push people away. And at the same time, like, there are things that are my core beliefs that I am not, and I think should be the core beliefs of our community right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not gonna push them aside because some of my students are very confused. I would love to talk about this. I would love to have events and to study together and all of these things. But I don't think that my mission as an educator is to make everyone feel comfortable.
I agree with you, and I know that this is not going to go well, but I imagine it's not going to go well, but I would say the same of students who were walking on campus, and by virtue of the fact of seeing Palestinian flags,
Yes, I agree.
would say like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel not just uncomfortable, unsafe.
Unsafe, yes.
Which this is a whole other conversation. What's the difference between safety and comfort, and what should we be striving for?
Hello and welcome to the Z3 podcast. I am Amitai Fraiman, the director of the Z3 project, and this is our podcast. This is a special episode. This is a new format we're trying out. Typically, I sit in conversation with one person, have an in-depth kind of one-on-one. This time we brought in two very special guests, dear friends of mine. I'll introduce them in a second. But the idea there was to see if we can try and replicate the energy that we get during the conference, which is where you have people who might agree on some things, disagree on others, sit in and dig deeper into some areas that are top of mind. In particular, now we're talking about the mood in Israel post the war, how we perceive ourselves as educators, as Jewish professionals, as members of the community. But I don't want to get too much ahead of myself, so I'll introduce our two guests. It was honored to have here Dr. Masua Sagiv, a Koret visiting assistant professor of Jewish law and Israel studies at the Helen Diller Institute at UC Berkeley, and scholar in residence for the Shalom Hartman Institute. And we were joined by another friend from Berkeley, but in a very different role. It's Rav Maya Zinkow, campus rabbi at UC Berkeley Hillel. And it was a really special conversation. The three of us just got back from Israel on separate trips, though we probably overlapped in time. And in the conversation, we heard a lot about the personal experience of going there and how different it is from what we were experiencing here in the U.S. and in the Bay Area. And moments of growth and pain and the ability to breathe and feeling home, even though it is not the safest place right now in the world. Just from a place of emotional alignment, of being among people who understand the complexity and the layers of our identity as Jews and how we feel about what is going on in the world. I will say that even though this is a depressing time in many ways for our people in our community. It's on the day of recording, it's 300 days since the war broke out. Many hostages are still not back. The war is going on, and a lot of pain and suffering is to be found everywhere we look. But this conversation and conversations like it do give me a lot of hope, because it shows that we have dedicated leaders who care about the well-being of our people and want to see us all flourish. It shows and demonstrates that we can come together across differences for productive conversation. And above all, it really just gives me a sense of solace and an ability to say, we can build back what was lost, and I dare say even add a new layer to this ongoing project of the Jewish people. And so I really hope that you find this conversation and its highs and its lows a source of hope as we move forward. So thank you for joining us in this Z3 podcast with Dr. Masua Sagiv and Rav Maya Zinkow. This is a Z3 Project podcast. I'm Amitai Fraiman. Please join us on our various channels, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Of course, sign up for our email and stay tuned for upcoming information about our conference on November 17th. Thank you for joining us. Have a great listen. All right, welcome. Welcome to the Z3 podcast. I'm very excited about this. This is new. I did some stretches today because I'm going to be turning around. My head's going to be on like a pivot. But I'm really excited to be joined by my two friends, Masua Sagiv and Maya Zinkow. And this is a new format for the podcast. We've done over 20-something episodes at this point of one-on-one conversations. Masua was a guest here. And we got great feedback, and it's been super interesting. But this is an opportunity to have a little more of a conversation in a way that kind of reflects and mirrors what we do in our annual conference. So I'm really grateful that you're here in this conversation, and let's see how it unfolds.
Great. Let's see.
Unfolds. All right. So, when we prepped for this episode, we initially started 1 point, and of course, time has passed since we initiated this, and things have been different. You were in Israel. I was in Israel. We probably overlapped at some point, but it's been now 300 days, right today, since this war has started and the hostages have been not freed, not all of them. And I'm just curious to start with your own personal observations so far in this moment. We'll start with you.
Personal observations in this moment. So I literally just landed back from Tel Aviv yesterday. And I think something that's more clear to me than ever is the significant gap between the lived experience of Israelis and Palestinians in the land and what people perceive in the States. And the conversations I was having there, I mean, all of it was just, I was able to have it in such a different context, right? The context is real versus rhetorical. And I think that for me, every time I go to Israel, I feel that way, of leaving behind the rhetoric and entering into the real is very powerful, and a reminder that everything that we're talking about here on campuses, in the mainstream Jewish community, in left-wing movements, whatever it is, it's so much rhetoric. And it's rhetoric about a place that is real, supremely real, with all of its beauty and complexity and horror. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I'm sitting with, is just that massive gap, and thinking, with only a few weeks out to the beginning of a new semester, how do we start to bridge that gap? And how do we teach this generation of young Jews how to have a relationship with this place, is the big question I'm sitting with. What is that relationship that I want them to have? And I want them to feel the love that I feel in a deep way, but I also want them to know all the harsh truths that exist about the miracle that is the state, the land, the people of Israel. And so those are some of the questions I'm sitting with right now, just landing back in the Bay Area.
Yeah, so I can imagine moving. There's the movement, you say, of leaving the rhetoric behind when you land there, and then also there's somewhat of a transition of trying to bring that back.
Right, how do you bring back the real when the experiences of American college students are just so different than any average Israeli is actually experiencing? It feels pretty big. It just feels like a big gap that I've been aware of for a long time, that I felt was increasing every single day since October 7th. And having experienced being there for the last month, I just feel it more than ever. And there's gaps on so many different levels, which we can get into later. But I think that's where I'm sitting right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Masua, for you, is going back home. Was it the first time since?
No, we've been there in the winter too, just for a quick family, friends visit. I think maybe we got back last week after a month, and I think what was very apparent from the moment we landed was looking around, seeing a lot of flags, but there were Israeli flags, not Palestinian flags. And it was just a feeling of, wow, not everyone think I'm the bad guy here. Even though being center-left, it's probably not exactly true in Israel too, but that's, again, for a different conversation. But there was a sense in the past 10 months, being an Israeli here, I think my two overwhelming emotions, in addition, to the pain and mourning, I'm putting those aside in a second because I think this is something that we all felt. There was a huge guilt for not being there, for not experiencing, maybe I'm supposed to experience what everyone, what my family, what my friends are feeling right now, what they're experiencing right now. I talked with my mother this morning. She told me it feels like the days of wait before the 6-day war when we thought it's our end. It's just like if something needs to happen, but we're just on hold, we're waiting. So there's the guilt, and there's also an isolation that some of it is imagined, but some of it is not. I know there are research is done on many minority communities, for example, black people, how they feel when a police car passes next to them. I feel like, and from talking to other people in the Jewish community, they feel that too. It's a vulnerability in the public sphere that, especially when you go on campus, and it's very clear. I think campus is divided. I don't think it's only one-sided, but what you see is only one-sided. So even we were walking one Shabbat with my family. We went to synagogue. We were going with Shabbat attire, and a woman with a dog was like looking at us every few seconds, and I was waiting for her to just start yelling at us. And after a minute or so, she's like, Shabbat Shalom, and I'm like, but it gives you a sense of what, like, to be always on your toes and feeling guilty for not being where you're supposed to be. It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, so going back kind of highlighted or heightened both of those. I mean, the sense of, on the one hand, the isolation when we're here, and it came through this sense of like of the home, of the of just seeing the flags. That visual itself was enough to kind of like lower the stress levels for a minute maybe until you got on the road. But
yeah, and I think also part of why this was extremely difficult is I'm starting my 4th year here in the Bay. I have to say that thanks in a lot of ways to the Jewish community, I've been feeling at home here too. So not completely at home in Israel, very much at home in Israel, not completely at home here, very much at home here. And then it really raises the question, where is my home? Do I have a home at all in this world?
Yeah. So you're both on campus in Berkeley, different roles. Rav Maya, you're the rabbi at the Hillel on campus, and Masua, you work there as an academic, both with Hartman, but also there in the law school. I mean, there's the difference in being raised in Israel, being raised in the States, both very committed, of course. And there's the difference in experience also on campus. And you started touching upon it, and you brought it up also. The semester's upon us. I know there's a lot of angst in the community, and Berkeley has always been in the eye of the storm in many ways, and I'm sure these days is not much easier. And I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience is curious to hear, what's happening. A lot has happened in the past year, and how you're kind of approaching it from your perspective, of course, and also where you're sitting.
Yeah, I think one thing also just thinking about being there versus being here and gearing up for being on campus again is, I think similarly to you, Masua, your experience of just that feeling of whatever conversation I was having, just by virtue of the fact of being there, whether I was having a conversation with my lefty, very politically involved friends or with the chayal, with the soldier that was, going back to base the next day to go back into Gaza. Those things aren't the exact same, but just meaning, sharing the spectrum of different conversations I was having, not needing to posture, not needing to make myself palatable to whatever person I was talking to, right? Whatever we were talking about, whether we agreed or disagreed, I just could be in the conversation without having to list all the reasons why I could merit to be in that conversation or merit to be human, right? Legible. So just that feeling of, I'm going to miss that. Like that, there was specifically a Shabbos lunch recently with friends that I was just feeling we were having this intense conversation, and I was joking, like, this could be a panel. There was native Israelis, there were people who made Aliyah, people visiting from the States, across, narrow but still wide political gap, because these days both those things can be true. And just remembering that feeling of ease and comfort with like being able to have machloket and disagree in a way that was not a threat to anyone there. And I think a part of it is gearing up to go back to, okay, what does it mean to be able to like bring some of that back, to maybe try to like live into that truth of I don't need to prove myself to anybody actually, and model that for students too, which I think is really powerful, that students need not posture to be legible. They can just be who they are. And I actually think a lot of the posturing is what we're combating, because so much of the sea they're swimming in is like an insistence that if you have this identity, you need to feel this way. And like, actually, you can just be who you are. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. And for me as a rabbi, it's this balance between the educational piece and the pastoral. So much of what I was doing in the last year was so much pastoral work, meeting students where they are, being a safe place for people to come, cry, ask questions, be confused. So many students walked into my office and just said, please tell me what to believe. I just need you to tell me what I'm supposed to do in this Super Bowl game. And basically to every student that walked in who said that, I would say, I bless you to stay confused. Like, that's actually the exact right place to be. And so I'm thinking about how do I translate, the educational message that I want to bring, which is highlighting and emphasizing and centering messages of peace and coexistence and models of those things, which I know are the minority in Israel and among Palestinians. But how do we bring that into a space that is also pluralistic? How do I translate an educational vision, which is of a particular political bend, even though I see it as, I think it's, I'll start that sentence over. Even though it could seem like a message of coexistence and peace ought to be some kind of middle of the road position, I know that, and I'm aware that it's actually a particular political message. And how do I bring that into a community that I'm leading as a rabbi, which is itself pluralistic, and we meet students where they're at, wherever they are? That's one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing and asking right now.
Yeah. That sense, how do we translate that sense of rootedness and authenticity to be able to rise above and have those conversations that we're trying to have?
Rise above the rhetoric and the noise of social media, which is totally deteriorating their ability to critically think for themselves.
Yeah. Masua, you've been dealing with this from a different angle. As an Israeli, as an academic, it's entirely different. I don't know why I'm using sports metaphors. I'm not. Whatever. It's a different ball game, for sure.
It's the Olympics right now.
It's a different parsha. There you go. No, but I'm curious. How you've been moving through this. We had, in our previous conversation, we talked about some of this, and I'm curious to hear how that's evolved, if it has evolved, and kind of also in keeping in mind what Maya's been saying. In terms of how students or some of these students are experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm in a weird spot because I'm an academic, but I'm not tenured in Berkeley. I'm still visiting. So I can feel what I want and I can do what I want. So I don't have the institutional constraints in a sense, which gives me less of power vis-a-vis the university administrations. But I'm in a weird, but I think good place because it allows me to be more in touch, I think, with a lot of students, to hear more voices of students, less voices of administration. It's more through different mediators. I have few different thoughts also in response to what you said, Maya. So on the one hand, I do think it's important to say Jewish students are not faring well right now. And they have good reason to, because as I said before, I think the campus is divided. It's not as if everyone are thinking the same way, but if you look outside, it's completely one-sided, completely. Like every walkway gives you the message that if you're a Zionist, then you're a criminal, then you're a war criminal, then you're committing genocide only by virtue of supporting the state of Israel. And that's not a healthy environment for young adults, for old adults
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
But at least for me, I know that I don't have to. I think for 6 or 7 months, I didn't come to my office. I only went to teach and came back home.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be on campus, but they cannot afford
Yeah.
not being on campus. They have to be on campus every single day. They have to be in social media every single day. So they have less of a control. So that's the one side. Maybe we'll talk about that later. I'm extremely frustrated that this topic is framed as a free speech issue. I don't think it's a free speech issue at all. I don't, as I see it, I'm extremely disappointed by the administration. But what I will say, and this, I'm not all the way convinced about this, but I will say that I think that this is a time, yes, I completely get why students can be confused and all of that, but I think it's okay to expect our students to work for the Jewish people or to be there for the Jewish people. Even if I would, up until 10 months ago, I supported the idea that we should invest in ourselves and learn and be the best person that we can be. And I still believe in that. And end with, I think we need to be more right now, even if it's extremely uncomfortable. And I do think that we have certain commitments to the people. And some of this lays obligations maybe to learn better, and I'm not saying be advocates. I think it's a bit different.
Yeah.
But I think Jewish students have an added role.
So just to clarify, to make sure that
Yeah.
I'm following, you're saying that up until 10 months ago, you're of the belief that students may be able to choose or not choose to lean in or out of their public Jewish identity.
Yeah.
And since October 7th, you think that's I don't know what word, I don't want to call it something that it's not, but the expectation that, not an expectation, but I call it a privilege to kind of be in the back of this has been revoked, basically.
It's hard to say what I'm saying, and I realize that because, and especially here, because I know that people were raised on individualism, and how can I force people to say things that they don't want to, say? And I don't want to tell students, be in a place that is not good for you, but if there's something that I really adore about Israel and the way that we raise people in Israel is the fact that there is a very serious commitment to something that is bigger than yourself.
Interconnectedness.
And I think that
collectivist mindset.
Yeah.
it's a collectivist mindset. It doesn't have to, and it has dangers of going to ultranationalism and racism and all of them, Jewish supremacy. Yes, I get all these dangers, but I feel like, I know it's not popular to say, but I'm kind of okay with saying it because I think that young Jewish people in Israel, and part of the gap that you were talking about is that young Jews in Israel have given themselves in different ways completely to the well-being of the Jewish people ever since October 7th. And I think it's okay to expect our students to be that way too, and the different boundaries of what is good for you as a human being and what's not.
Well, you see, and I, when I was there, being able to be in the Hafganot, be in the protest movements, demonstrations, whatever we want, however we want to translate Hafganot, because I actually think protest demonstrations, it's all different. And you see the different factions, and you see the younger people who are in the Omdim B'Yachad, in the Standing Together movement, wearing their purple shirts, which is a grassroots movement of Israelis and Palestinians, mostly Israelis, because Palestinians can't protest in Israel. But those I'm seeing those are my students, who they would be there, meaning, and those young people in Israel, young Jews in Israel, see themselves as giving even that, That is a way of showing up, I love my country, I love this place, and I want it to be better for everyone, and I want it to work better for everyone. There's one of the huge gaps is I agree with you, Masua, that I also often I'll say an unpopular opinion about tribalism, Every once in a while, I break whatever other people expect of me, And I'm actually, I want Jews to like be a little bit tribalist, right? Like we are a tribe. And I had a lot of challenges on and after October 7th and the days immediately following, wondering about Jews in my life who I could tell were not experiencing the same feelings that I was feeling. If you're not responding to this pogrom in the way that I am right now, just the feeling, like forget the political backdrop, just the feeling of that day and the days following, if we're not experiencing the same feelings, like, are we in the same tribe? And not even me gatekeeping or saying, you know what, you're not in my tent, but like actually just wondering, like with curiosity, like I actually don't know if we're in the same tribe of Jewishness or tribe of, I don't know, humanitarianness, humanism, whatever we want to call it. But and again, not with judgment, but with true curiosity from like a place of like, oh, we're not experiencing this in the same way. And that brings up questions for me because I'm a huge peoplehood person. Like I really believe in Am Yisrael, which is what's been most heartbreaking for me over the last 10 months, which is just experiencing, witnessing, being in the storm of Am Yisrael completely falling apart. The challenge for our students on campus from a rabbinic perspective is I also see that most of our students that come through the door of Berkeley Hillel, even the ones who grew up in a pretty strong Jewish community, their Jewish literacy is not huge. They don't have a thickness to their Jewish identity. A lot of them are discovering Jewishness for the first time when they walk through our doors because Berkeley is a place with 30,000 students and they feel like a number. And when they come into Hillel, we remember their name. And we have gender-neutral bathrooms. And there's a female rabbi, right? All these things that make someone say, who might never have been interested in Judaism before, say like, I'm Jewish, like what's this thing about? So I can't expect them yet to show up for the Jewish people. I also don't even, I think I have a question of like, what does it mean to show up for the Jewish people? And I think we can talk about that. But that's part of my question is like, how do I translate all the things that I know to be true about the history of the state of Israel in a way that I feel like is intellectually honest, while also communicating that sense of like, of deep love. And in some ways, you know, for however much I can say, oh, I didn't hear the word Palestinian until, you know, I was X years old, or I didn't know the realities of the occupation until far too late in my education. And I do think that there's a huge conversation to be had about how are we educating our youth towards more honesty. At the same time, I also feel pretty grateful of like the accident of my birth in a time when I didn't have access to social media in the same way that our students have access to all the information there is in the universe, in the known universe. Like that's an insane thing. Mm-hmm. And so,
a lot of it is fake with no ways to know what is and
a lot of it is fake or overblown or I mean simply even if it's not fake, it's extremist.
Exactly.
Right? Yep. I didn't have access to any of that. And I grew up listening to Naomi Shemer. And you know, like I actually am grateful that I have just that sense of like melting when I read a Yehuda Amichai poem. That like for my students, both because of their literacy, but also because they're growing up in a time where they know too much too soon. I don't know how to close that gap of in a way that's going to make them say, I want to show up, whether it's for the people of the state of Israel, where half the Jews in the world live, or for Am Yisrael. Yeah. Like, and many of them don't even know the difference between those things. Eretz, Medina, they couldn't tell you the difference among those three different categories. And so there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done in the American Jewish community, liberal American Jewish community, in terms of education and Jewish identity and making being Jewish something that's more than just an Instagram identity alongside their, you know, queerness or their pronouns or their racial identity. Like, what does it actually mean to be a Jew? And that's so much of the work that I do. It's just happening alongside this war.
One of the biggest crises that the Jewish people ever experienced.
Exactly.
Definitely in our life. And I'll just add two challenges to this. One is, how do you, at the same time, fight for Israel's body and for Israel's soul? And those two contradict each other, right? So when I'm here, I'm supposed to defend the fact that Israel has a right to exist, but at the same time, I'm supposed to criticize Israel's worst government ever, according, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most of Israelis.
Many Israelis.
And sometimes, right, when I gave a talk at Hillel about whether Israel is committing genocide, at the end, and I was critiquing the Israeli government for irresponsible and immoral statements. At the end of the talk, of the conversation, some students came to me and said, how can you stand here, criticize Israel, because everything that you say is used against us, not in order to criticize Israel, but in order to say that Israel has no right to exist. So that's like one additional challenge. And I think that another challenge in this environment is, hold on, I blank out. I did have one. What did you just say?
Social media.
Yes.
The
Literacy.
low literacy levels of
Yeah.
American Jews, the need to build that connection before it's happening against the backdrop of this crisis.
I don't remember.
So it'll come
Move
to
on.
but
Come
I
back.
have just an observation or a comment from from this exchange. You know, it's on the one hand we're saying, first of all.
I got it. Sorry.
Okay, good.
Can I?
Yes, go for it. I'll
It's okay?
remember.
Sorry.
It's
Sorry.
okay. Go for it.
The second
You're
challenge.
the guest.
The second challenge, I think, is that there is among American progressive/liberals, and I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know what's the theoretical difference between
Where does one end
but
and the
it's
other
hard,
begin?
But
Yeah.
it's hard for me to say
Yeah.
where exactly on the spectrum. I think that American Jews are more liberal than progressive these days. I don't know about the younger generation though. Anyway, but
On the
there's-
whole, that's true, right? Most American Jews are still Zionists, for example.
So I think that one of the things at the core of this is the question of nationalism and Zionism as a national project. And there is an inherent suspicion, if not complete rejection in progressive circles of a national project, because it will be immediately
Unless
of course, unless it's the Palestinian project. Yes, absolutely. But because it's not a settler colonialist project, right? And the Zionist project, Israel, or the American project, or the Canadian project, or European project in general, were all settler colonial projects. Not exactly sure why America gets to be and Israel not, although in most circles
I think
they reject both.
Yeah, I think the more that you, that's my sense.
But this challenge of the legitimacy of nationalism and as a byproduct of Zionism is also something I think that in younger progressive Jewish generation is something that is it's connected to the tribalism, but I think it's one more level, one more political level, if you will.
Yeah, and by the way, these terms, Zionism, anti-Zionism, they're, in my opinion, so not useful anymore, and not even relevant. Like, I mean, I was struck also just talking to different Israelis when I was there. Multiple people in separate conversations said something like, it's so absurd to me as a patriotic Israeli that the litmus test is now whether or not you're a Zionist. And they're like, that identity doesn't even mean anything to me. They're like, I don't need, it's like, I've never really identified as a Zionist. Like that term doesn't feel relevant because we have a state, Zionism was a movement to realize a national state of Israel, a national homeland for the Jewish people, and we have it. Daniel Sokach in his book says, it's as relevant as asking an American, are you for the Union or are you for the South? We could argue about that.
I don't know if I agree with that. I can see the utility of that, that intellectual kind of approach, and I see why someone could make that comparison, but I also think that that's a very narrow and limited interpretation of Zionism.
Well, right, so this is the question, right? Yeah. Do we, in my opinion, the term itself, the meaning, no, but the term, it just feels like it's beyond our liberating it from what it's become, because it's become whatever people want it to mean.
Well, that's exactly the point of Zionism, is that we don't let other people decide for us, right? I think that's like fundamentally...
How do you argue with someone, though, that thinks a Zionist is a Nazi?
Well, then...
Absurd, but how do you argue? There's no conversation to be had.
Is that really someone that you can have any kind of conversation with? If someone, if you're at the point where you're calling someone a Nazi, you're most likely not going to be able to have any type of conversation. From my experience, that's so like if you're as far down as that, and that goes all sides, right? If you're going to call someone, if you're speaking to any Palestinians a terrorist, then like you're not having a conversation, right? And it's not about the terms; it's something much deeper, I think, that we're dealing with. That's my experience.
Yeah, I guess it's just there's just so much irony in the fact that so many anti-Zionists and Zionists, first of all, probably believe the same thing. They just don't even realize it, and so. Right, like I'm thinking about even this conversation alone, right? The fact that people are going to write off the podcast, just because of the letter Z, right? Which, again, the question of like, well, then I can't even have a conversation with them. Right.
So
It's a challenge because if there are Jews and I'm here to serve the Jews.
So that brings it back to the point that I was going to say earlier, right? You were saying how we live in this. I mean, this is not like a news flash, not surprising. We all know this. We live in this insane moment in terms of communication and information. On the one hand, on the other hand, people are like, don't say something lest it be misinterpreted. And really, like because Masua said something at Hillel and Berkeley, now people are going to start believing certain things about Israel, right? So like we're like there's this weird kind of, right? And so similarly with like the terms and everything, yes, there's an abundance of the terms. And from my perspective, and this is what we're trying, not to be too self-congratulatory, but this is like the point of these conversations and the attempt to introduce this platform is to say that really the only way to deal with those who are interested, I can't, whatever.
The troubled, committed,
whatever
term,
is just to present compelling truths and ideas and let people, we have to trust that they're going to be able to discern and make that decision because, the no matter where in which realm you look, that overwhelming amount of information that's thrown at us is a problem. It's not limited to just the Jewish community and the questions of Zionism, anti-Zionism. It's in the general elections.
It's a challenge to our souls.
Yeah, and
it's a spiritual challenge.
Exactly. So and that's all to say that we can be part of the solution, but we can't be held responsible for solving these problems for everybody and for the Jewish population. And also we can maybe take a breath and say, oh, this is a much bigger problem.
Right.
That, right? The problem of many is half a soul. It's not a great thing, but at least we know, well, there's maybe other sources that we can turn to in terms of figuring out how to work through these issues, because I think we don't have a choice. Back to what Masua said, like we don't have the privilege of just saying, I don't care.
Right, and like I think about, every day I'm very in it, but then, I I could be little Rav Maya in Berkeley, preaching coexistence and preaching we can have conversations and Palestinians and Israelis both have the right to self-determination, and isn't that nice? And at the end of the day, unless the US government decides that they care about humans enough to regulate social media and what's being put out, I actually don't know, right? And all I can do is repair my little corner of the world, and that's what I'm trying to do. But you're right that they are huge, significant challenges that have so much more to do, with humanity and the state of humanity right now than just about the Jewish people. But
this morning I told my husband about stuff that I've read about Israel. I am so sick of being angry about things I cannot change. But at the same time, after 5 seconds, I think all of us as educators are also committed, and especially as Jewish educators, we do know that, how do you say advot?
The ripples.
There are ripples to everything that we do, and I think that if something held me in the past 10 months is the fact that I can do this work and serve, our community and our people. Which I think is a lot. Yes, we are facing great powers, and this is definitely a larger question and a larger problem than us. Not only on the social media front, but also on the world powers. Right? I mean, I think that to a large extent, the Jewish people is a pawn. And the Jewish state is a pawn.
As we've been.
As we've always been. It never turned out really
so
well
as is tradition, new in every generation, this is our lot.
But there is, I think, there are quite a few different things this time around.
Yes.
I think I'll just say one thing about Zionist, anti-Zionist. Let's not think about the terms even for a sec. I just think that people, especially Jewish people, who who decide by saying we are anti-Zionist to not seriously deal with about half of the Jewish people is just intellectual laziness.
But it's more. Yes, I'll say it's even more than half the Jewish people, right? Because
Yes,
a high percentage
because
of Jews who
you're
live
right.
outside of Israel would
You're right.
identify overwhelmingly in Europe for
Yes.
sure, Latin America
Yes.
for sure,
Yes.
and even in North America.
Yeah.
overwhelmingly,
Even,
right?
Well, it's
but even
also-
without the people
Yeah.
who define themselves
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or identify as Zionists, there are people who are
Yeah.
right now Israelis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are Israelis.
Yeah.
We need to seriously deal with this fact and not just write them off.
Yeah.
That's what's really like, even putting aside the terms and whether, Zionism today, I would say that Zionism is also to create an exemplary society in Israel, and therefore the mission is ongoing.
Still
but,
relevant.
But just
hurts those
take
words.
seriously the fact that we have half of the Jewish people are Israelis.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that? Are you going to write them off? What is going to happen to them when there is no longer Israel? I have yet to find a real and realistic and pragmatic and not just,
Well, yeah, this is where it comes back to it's all rhetoric.
Yeah.
It's not right. It's so not based in the real. Again, the left. I mean, I don't think I've said this sentence. I don't think this has come up yet explicitly. The American Jewish far left and not Jewish, right? The far left in America. The gap between the far left in America and the far left, the radical left in Israel, is huge, right? The reality of that. And just these movements in America and the campus movements being so disconnected to Masua, what you alluded to, which is like the scale of the crisis in the Middle East and the cultural realities of the broader Middle
This
East
is what I find
that
so-
surround the state of Israel.
Is that I find like it's almost like when I need a moment to kind of breathe, a little comic relief. It's like people talk about globalizing all kinds of things.
Yes.
And, they have zero understanding of global affairs and how this whole thing is mapped out in place. Like zero. It's just like so micro, like looking through whatever at a very specific element without taking into account movements across regions and how it's all interconnected. It's like, I'm like, what are we even talking about? And this is what I find, and I'm hearing also as an educator, like a level of frustration is, it's rhetoric, right? But for them, it's rhetoric. For us, it's our lives.
Correct.
Yes.
Right? Like, where are the folks who were in the encampments over the year? Where are they now? Vacationing somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want
They
to
don't
get
put, like-
into a trap of, people share videos, and I was having a conversation with someone the other day who, everywhere I go in the world.
You're from Berkeley?
You're from Berkeley. You're the rabbi at Berkeley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually it's like,
Are you okay?
Yeah.
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 Usually it follows with a ask. Are you okay?
Yeah.
But so then people love to tell me
Yeah. What it's like.
what they know and what it's
Yeah.
like. And, someone was saying to me like, we were having a reasonable conversation and they said, people show, I've seen so many of those videos where they go up to people in the encampments and they ask them like, what river, what sea, and they don't know. I don't, and again, I think it's helpful to know and to appreciate, again, the gaps in education that are needed. I don't want to get into the trap of being like, and
They
so
don't know everything. They don't know anything.
They're
Absolutely
idiots,
not.
right? And
Absolutely
that's not
not.
what anyone's right.
Yeah.
But meaning, as an educator,
Yeah.
right? To get back to that, as an educator, as a rabbi, I'm like, I actually have a moral, social, political responsibility to bring people in, and that is the challenge of like, right? The hard thing is like if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, and my baseline assumption is like, I'm not talking about whether or not Israel has the right to exist, because it does.
Yeah.
Let's like forget the question. It exists, right? Even that statement alone, which is like pretty apolitical. It's just a fact.
It's yeah.
That statement of truth might actually alienate someone from being willing to have a conversation with me, and
But at
that's
what-
hard for me.
Right, and I get that, but like at what point do we also, like the intellectual honesty that we're expecting in like the whole educational arc, right, of everything that we touch, and I agree with it, and I also have qualms. I grew up in Israel about what I was not exposed to at different times. Also real time, whatever, but putting that aside, like
Real time right now.
Yeah, and also, but at what point, also when we're sitting with someone, do we have the obligation to say, you know what, like, I can see why this might be trouble for you, but like, Earth is round. You know what I mean? Like, there's
also another frustration of me, and this is something that we don't call out. There is what you said before, Amitai, right? Like it's all social struggles are
Connected.
are not only connected, but they
yeah.
converge into the Palestinian issue. Like there are several images that show how all struggles, the LGBTQ and the women's right and the black rights and all of these are the same struggle itself. And we, a lot of times I'm in environments where people say, you need to understand that for these young people, it's just that all the struggles are convening to or converging to the same political issue. And we cooperate with it, even though they're not.
Right.
They're really, 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 really not. And I'm not trying, like the whole pinkwashing Israel
You're right.
or something like that. But I mean, no women's right, no LGBTQ plus rights, no black rights. It's not, and I hate, and I see Netanyahu on the stage saying that supporting Hamas is like KFC, chickens for KFC, and I hate to be on the same place as him on this, but on a real level, we don't need to cooperate with the fact, with the statement that all struggles are convergent on this. There, in fact, are not. There is a real problem and there's a real issue with the Palestinian issue. By the way, the encampments and the student protests are not helping this issue at all.
Right.
What they're doing, and I remember I stood a few months ago, I was on a panel in Stanford with two Palestinians. We were two Palestinians and two Israelis. It was an amazing panel hosted by the law school. And it was amazing to see the mirror image, how the Palestinians said, these protests are really damaging our efforts inside the Palestinian society, because why would anyone want to promote the two-state solution if all of their allies are saying, let's get rid of the state of Israel? And for me, it's the same thing. When I go back to Israel and I'm saying, no, we need to take seriously the Palestinian issue and we need to talk seriously about a Palestinian state, everyone will say, would tell me, what are you talking about? Everyone hates us. Yeah. They always hated us. So there's, and it goes back to the gap that you were talking about, how Israeli liberals, and I don't know if I can really say Israeli left because it is so.
There's none left.
It's like 1.5%.
But
left, but
can we say
1.5%
is not nothing?
I know
of a country of its size.
But
I know. But I will say more than that.
I'm not saying that with glee. I'm saying that
I know.
But I will say that Israeli liberals are the majority in Israel.
Yes, right.
Israeli liberals are the majority in Israel, and they feel that they have, because of this, who are our allies? I think that it's supposed to be American liberals, but are there any of those left? Which is a real problem and a real struggle. There was an amazing support by North American Jewry and by World Jewry following October 7th, and it's still ongoing, and solidarity, missions and all of this. But conceptually,
well, I think
ideas. Really.
Before you,
please.
No, I want you. Actually, you respond, because my question I think might take us another direction. So I'll let you.
I don't know if I remember what I was going to
say.
Sorry. No, it's okay.
Yeah. About the left and liberal.
About the left, about the American left, about encampments.
Israeli liberals.
Israeli liberals.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
It might come back. Yeah.
So you were saying earlier about, you said a few things that I'm trying to track a thread, and I don't know. I'm curious to hear your. It might come from more. There's going to be. I'll ask the question, and then we'll see how it happens. But you mentioned earlier. It started off with in the beginning. You were saying how, the difference between liberal and progressive.
Yeah.
Like right. And we're not sure where that line maybe is today. Most American Jewry said, are Zionists. We put them in the liberal camp or somewhere. And then he said, and then we moved as the conversation was moving. You're saying how there's a convergence of these issues that are not really related. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, yes, but I think that's from like a liberal perspective. But when you look at it from a progressive lens, right, it's actually those things are all connected, because the struggle is not about, solving this issue, but it's about war, the world order, social, cohesion, et cetera, et cetera. So power, all that stuff. So I think I think that it is my sense that as a community we're kind of part of the discomfort is that each one of those causes individually, you'd find huge Jewish support.
Yeah.
But when you lump them in together, right, that becomes a problem. And I think that's a dissonance that we're dealing with, vis-a-vis gaps. And I'm curious if that's something that resonates in your experience as well on that.
I think that I will say that I think that progressivism, I'm not sure if I said it right, progressivism is an important fixing movement. And identifying power relations and uncovering things that institutionalized racism, all of these things are important. I think they went too far. And the problem with, I come from gender and law, right?
Yeah.
From critical studies in general. And I think they're so important at uncovering injustices. Where that becomes a problem is that everything that we have is a reconstruction of everything and tearing down everything. And it's like fragmenting our reality because everything is injustice and everything is power relation so that we're not building anymore. So what I fear is that's the direction, that's where liberalism is strong because liberalism is in a place where it can build, whereas progressivism right now, if we're taking the ideology of progressivism all the way, it only takes us apart and everything it takes apart and not building. And we need both of these forces together, these powers together.
Listen, for me, it just comes back to the question of extremism, and I do think, these issues, LGBTQ, right? What you were saying, social, they're all connected, right? I don't agree that they're not completely independent of each other. They're all connected. That's true for me. They're not the same. And I think those are two different things, right? I think we can say, queer rights, women's rights, institutionalized racism, the plight of the Palestinian people. Those things are connected, but they don't need to be the same. And I think that's the important distinction, because when we say that they're the same, exactly what you were saying is true, and we lose the very important reality of context, of the context in which the state of Israel was created. The history of institutionalized racism, which obviously also impacts Jews. And I think another uncomfortable thing for Jews at the center of this is the reality of the depth of anti-Semitism in the white supremacist, fundamentalist project. I don't know, whatever we want to call that. For me, as a progressive person, the reality of anti-Semitism and facing that has also been an uncomfortable thing, right? Realizing people really are anti-Semitic, whether that's with intention or not, because I think most of the anti-Semitism that's happened over the last 10 months is really based on ignorance and something that's buried very deep and not based on people actually hating Jews. I think it's something that's very, very deep that we're still yet to uncover, which is also connected to world order, power, fundamentalist Christianity, Christian Zionism, all of this stuff, right? So for me, it's about them being connected from a progressive view of wanting the world to be a certain way. But yeah, when we say these things are the same, it erases the, specific history and cultural realities of, right, saying that the Palestinian struggle is the same as the Black struggle in America. That does a disservice both to Palestinians and to Black people. These things are not the same, and I agree. And I think that's really important for so many reasons. But yeah, also because things lose their meaning. If we say everything is everything, then who am I? We can't just say everything is terrorist, everything is settler colonialism. There have always been different ways of viewing the history of the world, different lenses to apply. White settler colonialism is not the only lens through which we look at history. There's so many different lenses that we can look through history, and suddenly and this goes back to the labels of Zionism and anti-Zionism, we're just flattening everything to the point where it's the only identity that matters is whether or not you're a Zionist. And I say that from both the left and also the mainstream Jewish institutional framework of fearing when people aren't. Right? when that becomes our only metric, like that is connected to like deep fundamental anti-Semitism. Because why is that our only metric all of a sudden? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I think,
By the way, I remember what I was going to say before, if
Okay.
now is a good time to say it.
It's always a good time.
Which is that what you were saying, Masua, about the campus protests being actually bad for Palestinians on the ground, and this, to me, one of just the deepest tragedies of the last year is that it all could have been so different. I think there's a million ways that that's true, and a million different things had to happen in order for it to be different. But like, what if you had a global movement of students saying, from the river to the sea, two peoples will be free? Like, what if this had really been the thing to change everything? And that just makes me really sad, because when I looked out at the protest, it wasn't, for me, it's not, like, yes, it's the reality of only seeing one thing, but it's like the only seeing one thing when I know that so many of those students probably actually believe something different, right? I don't know that all of those students actually believe, again, globalize the Intifada. They don't know what they're saying, and I don't think that they actually mean what they're saying, which is a problem, because we should mean what we say.
But there's a little bit of a, I want to stay away from, this is another trap that we often walk into, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to kind of, find one thing to
Right.
nitpick and do that. But so I want to I'll take a step back and I say, and this goes back to the question of where do we hold ourselves and those that are in our reach. I'm not talking about like the world, the oilam. I'm talking about, there are
people who are willing to have conversations with us.
But there are phrases and statements that are just like not okay, whether people understand them or not.
No, I agree.
I also want us to let people be accountable to what they're saying and where they're at. Like, it's part of conceiving our students as adults. And I do know that, like, I have encountered so many Jewish people who are adults who would have told me, if that would have happened when I was in college, I would have been in the encampment because I was stupid. But
or
I
because
still think it's like,
and because they had nowhere else to go, and I think that's really, this is a big thing as a Jewish leader, as a rabbi. One, that, well, yes, people should be held accountable for their actions. This, to me, touches on something that is huge for me, which is, what is the role of universities? Yeah. Which is a huge question.
You brought up also.
Right? Are we here to educate the next generation, or are we here to be a hedge fund with a little side gig of school? And that's
babysitting hedge fund.
Really, really huge. Like, that accountability piece is huge. And how do you balance accountability with the reality that scientifically their brains are not fully developed, their prefrontal cortex is not developed, and they are figuring their stuff out. Like, that's what you're supposed to do in college. And so, to me, just saying, l'chaim, like, let what's happening happen, not only for the fact that there were things that were happening that were anti-Semitic, but also because as educators, like, what? Like, when do we ever just say, like, actually it was an opportunity to intervene?
And it sounds like it's connected to what you were saying about the free speech. Once that's framed as free speech, then
I can't touch it. Then I can't touch it. And
Exactly.
actually, it was an opportunity to engage people in dialogue and to educate and to bring people together.
To build bridges that students are not capable of doing right
themselves,
now.
Correct.
But the university is capable of doing and is not actively doing. And the other universities that has done it, and smaller universities, we've seen successes because we need the responsible adults, and the responsible adults are at their closed rooms, worried whether they will say the wrong thing or will do the wrong thing. So they end up sending their different letters and statements only to the encampment people or only to the Jews, because they don't want them to, they don't want to take out something, or they publish a statement to all of the university that says basically nothing, instead of taking responsibility and saying, what are we supposed to do as an educational institution? And you know what?
Call the cops.
Call it. You know what?
Like, that's.
I think that when things, maybe we'll disagree here. I think that when things get to a certain point and you didn't do anything to prevent them, yes, you might need to call the cops. And
that's an indictment, by the way, on the university. If you're at a point where you have to bring in other people to clean up your mess,
you didn't do.
Yeah,
but but how is that? But that was the first thing they did.
Oh, because it was so. But is that? Yeah, because they abdicated responsibility for so long.
And at a place
but it took months.
But they didn't do anything in that month.
Exactly.
That's the critique. Yeah.
Exactly. They're not doing anything. They're only sitting
Right,
in
so it's
closed
tragic to me.
rooms
Wasn't saying-
with
No,
senior faculty
understand.
without saying anything to the students as adults, without upholding the university laws and rules, because it's not free speech if you put on a graffiti, or if you close areas in the university, or if you take over buildings.
Yeah.
This is not free speech.
So
Why
it's-
do we frame
right.
it as free
It's
speech?
tragic to me that we're living in a time where the first point of action they took was calling the police, right? That's to me the tragedy, which I think we can all agree with. And just to go back to like our own communities, because that's really what we have an impact. Though as a campus rabbi, I'm trying to have an impact on the administration and the institution, just chipping away. But like for me, to go back to what you said, Masua, about how many people have said to you, I would have been there, right? Or students that I talk to who say, literally, if I wasn't Jewish, I would be there. But the only thing that's keeping me from it is this like knowing that I shouldn't for some reason. Again, because their Jewish identity is not super thick. But I think a part of the reason that so many of those people would have been there is also because there weren't Jewish institutions that were willing to say hard truths and say, we can actually have a conversation, even amidst the context of we have no allies, the world is against us, I have to posture and make myself palatable, all these things. Like, it's not fair. So much of this is not fair, but I have to get over that. Like, for me, as in my role and what I do, I just am like, yeah, I can like sit here and list all the reasons that it's not fair, that I have to show up to interfaith spaces and first and foremost say that I am heartbroken every day when I look at the news and look at the images of what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. And by the way, right, I know more about what's happening in the West Bank than probably most of those people that are in that room, but whatever, like put that aside. Again, putting all of that aside, I have to show up and I have to do these things. At the end of the day, I have to do that to get the job done, which is to ultimately get to a different future. And so, yes, none of it's fair. And it's tricky when you have the reality of Israelis not being to go anywhere in Berkeley without having to justify their existence. And I know that's true, which is an insane thing to say. I know that's true, but like that's an insane thing that I have to say that. But it's also true that Jews who identify as progressive also have nowhere else to go but Hillel, right? And so how can we, on day one of the new semester, say we are a place where you can come and you can have conversations about this place called Israel, this place called Palestine, whatever we want, whatever. Like,
Is that? I imagine the answer is no, but I'm just curious. Is that the statement, or in other words, like my question was like, Hill's a place you're going to be Jewish.
Hill is a place you come to be Jewish.
Yeah.
Period.
And if someone comes
I
and says,
wish
"What
that,
about
well, I
this?"
wish that was the only. I wish
'cause
that
then
that's all I needed to say.
Right.
I can't. Right. We can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
Because, and this is anti-Semitism, right? Every Jew that's walking around Berkeley has to justify their position on Israel, whether they know anything about it or not, right? Students who come to my office who identify as progressive, who are like, why is my roommate litmus testing me on this? Like, I don't know enough to even have a position, and if I did, it would probably be anti-Israel, but I don't want to say that to this person who doesn't know anything. Like, they're all dealing with that. So,
But that's also like, okay, it's really not fair, but that's the situation right now, and that's reality right now. And I get why, and I get from the one hand that there is a place that needs to have this questions. I think that Hartman
nuanced
is
questions,
trying
yes.
to be that place too. Definitely Z3 is trying to be that place too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also have to remain relevant. Or maybe the question here is, who are we serving? We're saying like we're serving the Jewish community, and who in the Jewish community? We're supposed to be everyone, but it's kind of difficult to say who is everyone and who's outside and who's inside. And when you're trying to do what the university should have done,
right.
The danger is that you might not be relevant to the Jewish students and population.
Yeah, but listen, at the end of the day, all the experience I'm drawing on right now is conversations with students.
Yeah.
Right. And so, with Jewish students, and I serve Jewish students. And I work really hard, and also because of everything I've said today, because of how I present, because of stuff that's hanging in my office or not hanging in my office. Like, I work really hard to say to students, my door is open to anyone who wants to talk to me.
Yeah.
And some students will take me up on that, and some students don't. And like, right, I can't be a rabbi to everybody. I know that. I've known that for a long time. Accept it, and I move on. But right, I can only be who I am. And it happens to be that who I've been for most of the spring semester, let's say, is a place for students to come and be like, I love being a Jew. I love Hillel. It's my spiritual home. It's my social home. And I'm really uncomfortable saying how I really feel about this war because of what I've said in the past and how it's been received by other people who take up a lot of space in this building. And so to me, that's right, like, okay, so how are we creating space, both for those students to be able to see each other and be like, okay, you're not alone in how you're feeling. And then once we do that, how do we bring everybody together in conversation? And it might not be possible. Like, I think your question is a really hard one, which is like, we are here to serve Jews. Yeah. But like, can we really serve all Jews? Yeah. But we have to be willing to draw lines on both sides, yeah, right, of this conversation.
I also think, I'm not sure if I'm going to be happy with what I'm going to say now. Inclusion is important,
yeah,
but it's not everything. And being extremely uncomfortable is not good, but I won't always change my policy because of it. And it's also, it builds character, right? And I think I'm just like saying,
you are right,
Masua.
Like, you're right.
Very, very gentle because I don't want to push people away. And at the same time, like, there are things that are my core beliefs that I am not, and I think should be the core beliefs of our community right now. Mm-hmm. So I'm not gonna push them aside because some of my students are very confused. I would love to talk about this. I would love to have events and to study together and all of these things. But I don't think that my mission as an educator is to make everyone feel comfortable.
I agree with you. And I know that this is not gonna go well, but I imagine it's not gonna go well, but I would say the same of students who were walking on campus and by virtue of the fact of seeing Palestinian flags.
Yes, I agree.
Would say like,
yeah,
oh, I feel not just uncomfortable, unsafe.
Unsafe, yes.
Which this is a whole other conversation. What's the difference between safety and comfort? And what should we be striving for? Obviously, physical safety is a priority. If you don't have that, then you can't do anything else. Our students were physically safe I'm willing to say that.
The majority, other than very anecdotal
one-time
incidents, but I will say when it's an ongoing 10-month, not 10, right? So 6 month or 7 month.
Yeah.
When you
because they're not in session now.
Yes, because of the summer.
Yeah.
When you every single day, when there's a clear message from everywhere, that it's not just the Palestinian flag.
Yeah,
You're right. It's like
emotional. And this brings up the
genocide, war criminal, like all of this.
It's again, this is the flattening of. First of all, something doesn't need to be genocide in order for it to be horrendous.
Yes.
And second of all, to say there's no sense of perspective or scale. To say to someone, you are committing genocide. You are a genocider because you're participating in such and such fellowship, which a student has told me. That's what they've been told by other Jewish students. Like that. First of all, what is it?
It's nonsensical.
It's nonsensical. And again, if these people are Jewish, right? Or like, yes, I agree with you, Masua. We need to have values and we need to say them clearly. And I'm not going to change myself. And I'm just sitting in this from the reality of so many of these Jews who just don't know enough. So it's like how I can't just walk away. And again, these are people who are willing to be in the conversation with me, right? Yeah. Students who answer my emails. And by the way, there are plenty of students who don't.
I don't think the expectation is about you're unwilling to bend your own values, therefore you're not going to be welcoming. Right? Like, I think there's a pretty, you may have heard of this movement, Chabad, right? Like they're unwavering on their own sense of commitment of their values, but they're like the most welcoming, right?
They're not more welcome.
Not more than Berkeley Hills, but no.
Okay,
but generally
cut that part out.
generally, no. generally speaking, like that's the perception, and there's issues that come with that as well. But I think there's a model for that. Like I don't think that's I don't think that's what is being said is that like this is one or the other.
Yep.
It's just being able to slowly and in a supportive way reflect also where there is a little bit of
what I will say without any like humor or side comments, there are plenty of people that do not feel welcome at Chabad.
Yeah.
So like we also have to be willing to say, we know that by saying certain things, there are going to be students that don't want to come to us anymore. And I am saying we need to do that both from the side of saying
on all
we
sides.
We believe in Israel's right to exist. Again, irrelevant question, but fine. And we are also people who engage in deep dialogue and deep criticism.
We happen to be looking specifically, I think, because this happens. In this moment, this is top of mind, and certainly the way you've presented yourself here as how you understand yourself as a progressive person. So it's easy to look in that way. But I wouldn't, I don't think anybody here would disagree that if we had someone coming in and saying, what happened in Sde Teman is a good thing. We'd be like, who are you? You are not. This is not what we believe, right?
Yep.
So I don't think there's. I think the clarity there is at least in this conversation is true.
Yeah.
There are legit. We believe there is a broad, but still a definition or legitimate boundary around what we accept or tolerate.
Yeah.
And I think we in our own biases, I think that there are people who might find themselves on the other side politically who might be a little bit more comfortable with what, in the margins there, to say, well, if we push them out, then they're going to go full, you know what I mean? So we just have to just be aware of that.
Yeah, and by the way, like this is all a conversation that's relevant not just to Israel, but to American politics as well, and pluralism 100%. And lines, and like someone walks in with a Trump shirt, what is that? What do we do? Like these are all big questions, and again, it's all in the context of like what we've been talking about, this extremism and.
So I mean, this has been phenomenal. We've started very, very personal, and we slowly started, because even though there was disagreement, it's still more comfortable than talking about the self and the personal. So I'm curious, just like as we're winding down, wrapping up here, like just more of a reflective. Have you seen, and this came up in the prep also. I talked about where you are now, and I'm curious to hear if you've noticed a shift in self in this moment, with the backdrop. We can give it to the professional. We don't have to go, all the way. But I'm just curious to hear, because it's such a turbulent time, and people who listen to this also are facing this. And I think hearing from thoughtful people and leaders how they themselves are coping, I think can be really productive and helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think even before October 7th, I was on. Let me rephrase. I always believed in academia that is connected to reality, and I really had problems with academia that is in the ivory tower. Mm-hmm. Even before October 7th, I found myself, and especially, I work at Hartman, right. So I went more and more to the public intellectual spheres, but I think that ever since October 7th, so much, and this is personal and I think also professional, when I think about the role of academia and where academia is today, I have a lot of questions on what is the role of academic education today. Who are we as people inside the system, and what are our commitments? I think that Jewish academics should embrace more their commitments towards the Jewish community, which is something that a lot of other communities have been doing in academia, but Jews were kind of like, we need to stay away from this, and we only need to be critical, and we need to be completely neutral, and of course neutrality is really impossible. And I think also my academic community are mostly the Jews now. As I said before, I was in, I'm in gender and law. This academic community has not responded well to the gender-based crimes on October 7th, other than one phenomenal professor. So so I'm feeling more and more comfortable in the Jewish community. I have very problematic. I didn't think before that necessarily anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I still think that theoretically it can be not anti-Semitism. I think that in practice it usually is, or at least the way we see it portrayed. So I think all of these, like anti-Zionism, the role of academia, and my place in all of this really shifted following October 7th.
Totally resonant. On October 6th, I would have been waving the flag of anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, like everybody needs to calm down. And that was true, by the way, even more, this is also my fourth year, going to be my fourth year in the Bay, and before this I was in New York. And certainly, like, since I moved to the Bay, like, been slowly realizing, like, in practice, like, oh, maybe that's not always true. And and definitely every day since, like, I fully agree about the theoretical, right? I could write you a 5-paragraph essay, clean and cut, why these two things are different, and the way that I've seen them, heard them, experienced them, certainly in the last 300 days in practice, the lines are much blurrier, and again, whether or not it's intended or not, but the impact. So that's definitely a shift. And in general, like, before October 7th, my comfort with the word Zionism was really flaky and fragile. And even though I do think that there's like a need to revisit these terms and what they mean, right? If you ask me in a very plain way, like, are you a Zionist, meaning Israel has the right to exist and defend itself, and Israelis have the right to self-determination and all that, like, yes, and that's also different just because of, again, like, the political movements that I'm in and adjacent to, that there's this need to couch everything or phrase things in a certain way. And and I mean, again, having the zchut, the merit to have been in the land in the last month and hear from Israelis, Palestinians of many different walks of life, just feeling that deep sense of connectedness and commitment to, I think, is stronger than ever. And before October 7th, my work was very not often about Israel. Like, I barely spoke about Israel to students because things were relatively quiet in the last few years because of COVID, but also because there's so much more to my work as a rabbi than all of this. Like, I actually am there to help Jews do Jewish. But realizing just in this moment that we just can't avoid the conversation, whether that's because it's just been thrust into the mainstream of the Jewish conversation or because half the world's Jews live in Israel. So, like, okay, it's time that we actually figure out what we do. And so just dealing in it and thinking in it, that to me is also just a shift of, like, really, really just going in and reading all I can and having all the conversations I can instead of avoiding, which is pretty easy because there's plenty of other things to do at Berkeley Hillel. So.
Good. Thank you for that. Yeah. So we're ending in just a minute, and I want to thank you both for joining for this.
Thank you.
New format of the podcast. I really am grateful. You both schlepped from Berkeley. You came here. We have the setup, but still.
Yerida.
A little bit. But thank you for the thoughtful conversation, for being willing to put yourself out there and share openly. It's not an easy time for our people. It's not an easy time to highlight differences in a time where we need to find actually community and home. And I think this is an exercise that helps build a much more stable home now and moving forward. So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to more conversations.
Thank you. May we meet Besor Tovot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Amen.